Hello everyone, and today we will be learning everything you need to be a confident After Effects user. I divided this video into 11 parts. The time codes of every part will be in the description, so you can easily skip something or find what you need. So here is the program. Now we can see two big buttons in the center, New Composition and New Composition from Footage. If you click on New Composition, you can set the composition settings, resolution, frame rate, and duration. If you click on New Composition from Footage, you simply choose Footage to import, and it creates a new composition with the same resolution, frame rate, and duration as your footage. Okay, so the interface contains panels. You can undock them, place them where you want, close them, and open them again in the tab window. Here is also the full list of them. You can always right-click on default right here and click on Reset to Saved Layout to come back to the default layout. Also, you can make your own layouts, right-click and Save as New Workspace. Okay, the top panel is Tools. The first button is Home. If you click on it, it just opens the window you see when you open After Effects. The next three buttons: Selection Tool, shortcut V, Hand Tool, shortcut H, and Zoom Tool, shortcut Z. By default it scales up, but if you hold Alt it scales down. Rotation Tool, shortcut W. You select layers and rotate them around their anchor point. Unified Camera Tool, shortcut C. Camera Tool works only with 3D layers. You select Custom View 1 for example, and you hold left click to look at your scene from different perspectives, or hold right click to look closer or further. Anchor point, shortcut Y. Select this tool and layer, then you can move anchor point. Rectangle tool, shortcut Q. Also you can hold Alt and left click to get rounded rectangle tool, click again to get ellipse tool, click again for Polygon tool, and click one more time for Star tool. They all create a new shape layer. But if you selected a layer and you use this tool, it will create a mask for this layer instead. Pen tool, shortcut G. It creates a new shape layer and you can draw your own shape. And the same, if you selected a layer and use this tool, it will create a mask for this layer instead. Type tool, shortcut Ctrl T, allows you to create text layers and type what you want. To use the next tools, you need a video or image you import it to your project. Drop on the timeline and then double click on it. Brush tool, shortcut Ctrl B. Select this tool and now you can draw stuff for each frame. Clone stamp tool, shortcut Ctrl B. It's the same shortcut for brush tool, you just need to press it twice. Hold Alt and left click on the area you want to copy, and then left click on the area where you want to paste the copy. Eraser tool, shortcut Ctrl B. It's still the same shortcut, you need to press it 3 times. This tool simply allows you to erase some pixels. Roto brush tool, shortcut Alt W. When you want to isolate a certain object of your frame, you select this tool and draw an outline of the object. Hold Alt and left click to remove areas you don't need. Last tool is Puppet Position Pin tool, shortcut Ctrl P. Hold Alt and click once for Puppet Starch Pin tool. Click 2 times for Puppet Bend Pin tool, click 3 times for Advanced Pin tool, and click 4 times for Overlap Pin tool. All of these tools allow shapes to be morphed and reshaped. You can bend them, stretch them, distort them. Of course, some of these tools need a bigger explanation, but right now we're just learning the interface and what all of these buttons mean. The last checkbox here is snapping. If you click here, the points and boundaries of your objects will be snapping to each other, and you can hold Ctrl to reverse the behavior. These two buttons, snapping along edges beyond layer boundaries and snap to show features inside collapsing compositions, are like settings for the snapping. The explanation what they do can be a little bit confusing, so let me just show you. The first button, snap along edges beyond layer boundaries, helps you to easily align your objects. The next button allows you to snap objects to layers inside compositions with collapse transformations. This thing should be turned on, and we will talk about it later. Also, it allows you to snap objects to individual characters in pre-character 3D text layers. For example, right now I have a composition with two objects inside, and as you can see, I can't snap my object to the object inside this composition, but if I press this button, I can do that. Okay, the next panel is project. There will be a list of all items your project contains. Your compositions, videos, pictures, solids, other After Effects projects, Photoshop and Illustrator files. One very important thing, After Effects doesn't create a new copy of your file if you import it. It creates a link to your file, so don't delete files you use. Also, if you move your files to another folder, After Effects will say your files are missing. Here is the search bar. If your project contains a lot of items and you need to find a certain one, just type here the name of the item and it will show it to you. You can click here to interpret your footage, conform to another frame rate. For example, if you have a sequence of pictures and you want it to be a video with a certain frame rate. You can click here to create a folder to organize your project. It's more useful than it seems. You can also click here to create a new composition. Click here to change project settings. I'll then left click on this button to change color depth. You can set 8, 16 and 32 bits per channel. The last button is delete. You simply select your items and click delete, or just press delete button on your keyboard. Also, if you scroll here, you can find some information about your items like type, size, file path. The next panel is timeline. The blue marker is time indicator. Time is displayed here. By default it shows hours, minutes, seconds and frames. Ctrl and left click to show only frames. This is a search bar. Use it if you have a lot of layers. This button shows how your compositions are connected, and it's good to quickly select another composition. This button turns on 3D. You also need to turn the 3D switch on for all layers you want to be 3D. This button hides all layers for which the shy switch is set. This is the shy switch, and here's how it works. The next button enables frame blending. For example, you have a video with 30 frames per second frame rate and you want to stretch it and make it 2 times longer, so your video will be only 15 frames per second, which doesn't really look smooth. So you can turn on frame blending and it will make your video a little bit smoother. The next button enables motion blur. It just blurs moving objects in your composition. You also need to turn on the motion blur switch for each layers you want to blur. The next button is graph editor. The graphs are used to edit the speed of the animation between the keyframes. This tool is a little bit complicated. I will tell you more about it when we are animating. Now let's look at these switches. This one makes layer invisible and this one mutes audio. The solo switch makes all non-solo layers invisible. and the lock prevents the layer from being edited. This switch changes the rendering order and adds rasterizing. If you turn it on for a composition, it will be transformed first, then rasterized. For example, right now I have a composition with two objects inside that extend beyond the composition. The objects look cropped, but if I click here and turn collapse transformations on, the objects aren't cropped anymore. Also, if collapse transformations turned off and I scale the composition up, the objects inside lose quality. So I turn it on again and it adds rasterizing. This switch changes the method of calculating how your object would look after scaling it. So if you are scaling a photo or a video, you can try to click here and see if it looks better. It's not necessarily, of course. If you turn this switch on, all effects that apply to this layer will be applied to all layers below. The last thing is parent and link. If you link layer 1 to layer 2 and then scale or move layer 2, layer 1 will be scaled or moved too. The next panel is Viewer panel. If you have two or more viewer panels, you can click here and it will always preview this view. For example, right now I have two panels. The first one displays composition 1 and the second one displays composition 2. If I press spacebar, it's previewing composition 1. But if I click on always preview this view for the second viewer panel and press spacebar again, it's previewing composition 2. So this button controls which viewer panel plays audio and video. The next button, Primary Viewer, is similar to always preview this view. It controls which viewer panel plays video through Mercury Transmit. Mercury Transmit allows you to send video frames to external video device. You can find it in Edit, Preferences, Video Preview. The next button is Adobe Immersive Environment. It allows you to preview how your 360 and 180 footage looks like in a VR head-mount display. The next pop-up menu is a magnification radio. Also, you can just use your scroll wheel to change it. The next menu is Grid and Guide options. Well, it can be helpful, for example, if you want to arrange objects on the same level or find the center. The next button is Toggle Mask and Shape Path Visibility. Right now you can see my project with masks and shapes, and if I turn this off, the shape paths and masks aren't visible anymore. Preview time, take snapshot, and show the snapshot. Show channel and color management settings. There are three color channels, red, green and blue, because all other colors can be obtained by mixing red, green and blue. Also, if picture has transparency, there is also the first channel, alpha channel. The next menu is the quality of preview. You can decrease the quality of preview and it will be rendering the preview faster. The next button is Region of Interest. It allows you to isolate a certain area and the rest of pixels won't be visible. Also, you can go to a composition and click on Crop Comp to a region of interest, and your composition will be cropped to the region you isolated. Toggle Transparency Grid. If you press this button, it shows you what areas of your composition are transparent. If you turn this off, the transparent areas turn black, and it doesn't mean they lose transparency, just sometimes it's better to work with black background. The next menu is 3D View. If you are working with a 3D composition, you can look at your composition from different perspectives. The next menu is Select View Layout. It allows you to select several views and then you can also set different perspectives for them in 3D View menu. The next button is a Toggle Pixel Aspect Ratio Correction. When you are creating a new composition in settings, you can choose Pixel Aspect Ratio. By default, it is square pixels. But pixels can be different, and if you are working with a different Pixel Aspect Ratio, you need to turn this on. Right now I have one composition with square pixels and the other one with anamorphic pixel aspect ratio. And as you can see, the other one looks constricted, so I need to turn this on, and now it looks alright. The next menu is Fast Preview. It helps a lot to work with hard compositions that need a lot of time to render. Right now I have this kind of composition, and if I make any change, it needs a lot of time to render. But if I set the Fast Preview menu to Fast Draft, it reduces the quality so it renders faster. The next button is Timeline, just another button for timeline. If you closed your timeline, you can click here to open it again. The next button is Flowchart. You click on it, then click on this little plus to see how all of your compositions and elements are connected to each other and where are they used. The last thing is Adjust Exposure. It affects view only. And the last button here is Reset Exposure. Alright, now only these 10 panels left. The first one is Info. It shows the color and the coordinates of the pixels that the mouse cursor points to. It works only for composition in Viewer panel. The Audio panel allows you to increase or decrease volume, right and left or both channels. The Preview panel. Basically, it's preview options. One useful feature here is Skip. It allows you to preview your compositions skipping every 1, 2 or 5 frames, so it's going to be rendering faster. The next panel, Effects and Presets. This is one of the most useful panels. There are thousands of different effects, some of them are similar. Usually you just type here the name of the effect you need and drag and drop it on your layer. The next panel is Align. It allows you to align your items how you want. There are all ways to align items. The next panel is Libraries, and it's a really helpful panel. Don't ignore it like some people do, because it makes your work a lot easier. It gives a comfortable access to your assets. You simply create a new library, then drag and drop your assets here, create folders to sort them, and now you have comfortable access to your assets in all Adobe programs. It's very comfortable to import your files from Illustrator, for example. The next two panels, Character and Paragraph, are for editing text. The first one allows to edit characters and the second one allows to align text. The next panel is for tracking objects in a video. For example, you want to add a certain element to a moving object in your video, so you need to track this object and then you can do it. And we will do it later. The last panel, Content Aware Fill, allows to remove any objects from your video. It analyzes your footage and adds the pixels that fit the most. And we will do it later too. In this part, we will create this simple slideshow. Okay, now it's time to learn some basics of animation. Let's create a new composition, HDTV Full HD preset, Full HD resolution, square pixels, frame rate 2997, 1 minute duration, and OK. So the first thing we need to do is to import our footage. I'm gonna use my own photos. Import. Now I drag and drop it on the timeline. And as you can see, the photo is bigger than my composition, so I press Ctrl-Alt-F to make the photo the same size as my composition. Now right click here, New, Null Object. Null object is a simple transparent controller. I can scale and move it just like other objects. For example, right now I have a composition with blue and yellow squares. It seems like they have the same animation, but actually the blue one is not animated. I animated the null object and then linked the blue square to the null object. And now, if I move the blue square, my animation will not be spoiled, because I don't add any new keyframes and change them. But if I try to move the yellow square, I will spoil my animation, because the changes either add a new keyframe or set the new value for the current keyframe. Okay, now let's turn snapping on and move the null object to the left center. Now let's start animating. I click here, then I zoom in my timeline. Then I move the time marker to the time when I want the animation to start. I click here, then click on this watch. Then I move the marker to the time when I want the animation to end, and click here to create another keyframe. Then I change X position for this keyframe. And parent my footage to the null object. Now we have the animation. But the animation looks linear, it doesn't look smooth. So I select all the keyframes and press F9. And then go to Graph Editor. Now I select the keyframe and move this yellow slider. And this one too. Now let's see how our animation changed. It looks much better and smooth now. Let's see how it works. This graph basically shows how the speed of the animation changes. And these graphs should always be smooth. Right now you can see these little dots. They show the position of the object every frame. Okay, now let's rename this null object to 1. And create a new solid. Solid is just a full screen colored rectangle. Let's pick a color. Now let's duplicate our null object, Ctrl D. Let's place it above our solid and move our solid to the left until it's invisible. Now I want to link the solid to the null object. Select a layer and press U to see everything that animated. Let's see what we have. Now let's duplicate the solid and the new null object. Place them above all layers and shift the animation of the new null object and change the color of the new solid. Ctrl Shift Y. Again, we need to move the new solid to the left and link it to the new null object. Okay, looks good. Okay, now let's duplicate the null object one more time and shift it. And add another footage. By the way, we also need to press Ctrl-Alt-F to make it the same size as our composition. Move it to the left and link it to the new null object. Let's see what we have. Great! We have the first transition now. But I think it's long. Let's select all our null objects, press U and shift the last two null objects. Yes, that's better. Alright, now I want to add another animation for my footage. Okay, I select my footage, click here, then here, click on this watch. Go to the beginning, create another keyframe, go back to the last keyframe, scale it up, let's see, that looks alright. Now I want to do the same for the second footage. I can press S to quickly select scale. I find the frame when the footage stops moving and click on the watch. Then I go to the time when I want the animation to stop and create another keyframe. I select the first footage to copy the scale from the last keyframe. Now let's see what we have. Looks alright. It's time to add some text, but also we need to create text holders. Create a new solid with black color. Let's go to transform and scale it down, maybe 25% of the size. Let's move anchor point to the right top corner and move the solid to the right top corner of the composition. I want to increase the width. Maybe 35% of the size would be alright. Now let's animate the scale. I click on the watch, move the time marker, create another keyframe, go back to the first keyframe and set the scale to 0%. Select both keyframes, press F9, go to graph editor, and I can move these sliders, but also I can just right click keyframe velocity and set the influence 50% for example. As you can see, it changed my graph. Alright, now we have the animation. Let's create text. I select type tool, select the area, let's set another color. And type some text. Now I need to align it. Press Ctrl-Alt-Home to set the anchor point in the center of the layer. I want to set another font style. Now we need to duplicate our solid. Ctrl-D again. I need to select it. Place it above our text and click on Toggle Switch Modes and set TrackMate for the text to AlphaMate Black Solid 1. If you set TrackMate for a layer to AlphaMate, the layer above will be used as a mask for the layer you set TrackMate for. Right now I have two shapes. The first one has an animated mask, the second one is not animated. I just set TrackMate to AlphaMate for this layer and animated the shape above this layer. And as you can see, the animation looks similar. If I set TrackMate for a layer to Alpha Inverted Mate, the layer above will be used as an inverted mask. If I set TrackMate to Luma for a layer, it will be making certain areas of this layer visible, depends on what areas of the layer above are brighter. So I have a shape of these purple bars, and I have a solid with this animated gradient. I set TrackMate to Luma for the shape layer, and let's see what happens. Also, let's turn the toggle transparency grid. Okay, and now we have appearance animation, but also we need fade animation. Let's identify the proper time for fade animation to start. And select the last keyframe, copy it, Ctrl-C, and paste it, Ctrl-V. Now move the time marker to the time when you want the animation to end. Select the first keyframe, copy and paste it. Let's check the graphs. We also can check keyframe velocity. And we need to do the same with the solid we used as a mask for the text layer. Alright, it's time to organize our project because it's hard to work with these layers. Some of them after a certain time we don't need, so we can cut the layers on the timeline and pre-compose them to make a separate composition. I select all layers except for the last footage and the null object linked to this footage. I press Alt right square bracket, cut them on the timeline. I place them below the footage and right click, pre-compose. Let's name it slide 1. And we have a separate composition with the first footage and transition. Now let's cut the rest of the layers, because before the certain time we don't need them either. I select both of them and press Alt left square bracket. Now let's open our new composition and copy our text and the text holder. Ctrl C. Go back to composition 1 and Ctrl V. Move the text on the timeline. We need to place the invisible black solid above the text and the visible one below the text. Now we have the same animation. Let's change it. Select Anchor Point tool and move it to the left bottom of the layer and move the text holder with the text to the left bottom of the composition. Also, we need to do the same with the second black solid. I think the animation starts too early, so let's shift it. Yeah, that's better. Let's save our project, go to File, Save, or just press Ctrl S. Alright, let's continue to animate. Select the null object, press U, find the time where you want the animation to start. Create a new keyframe. Move the marker to the time when you want the animation to end. Create another keyframe. And now let's move our null object until our footage is invisible. Select the keyframes and let's check the graph. Let's change keyframe velocity to 80%. Create a new solid. Let's pick the same color we used before. Make the solid the same size as our footage. Move the solid to the top until it's invisible. Duplicate the null object. Link our solid to the new null object. Now duplicate the solid and the null object one more time, place it above these layers, shift the animation, Ctrl Shift Y to set another color. I'm gonna use the same colors. Now duplicate one more time the null object, shift it, and drop the next footage on the timeline. Press Ctrl Alt F again to make the footage the same size as our composition and move it to the top. Again, we need to link our footage to the new null object, and let's see what we have now. I want to make sure if everything is correct. Okay, it's time to pre-compose the second slide. I selected the first null object and pressed U to identify the time when the animation begins. I select the layers to cut them on the timeline because I don't need them after the certain time. Now I select the last null object to identify the time when the animation ends to make the zoom in animation for the last footage. I select the layer and press S, click on this watch, create a new keyframe, move the time marker, and click here to create another keyframe. Select the previous footage to copy the scale, and paste it. Let's see again what we have. Now let's duplicate our text and text holder again. I select these three layers, press Ctrl D, move them on the timeline. I need to find the time when I want the animation to start. Now I need to move the anchor point again. And the text holder to the top left corner of the composition. Okay, it's time to cut all the layers on the timeline and pre-compose them. Let's find the time when the transition ends and press Alt right square bracket again. Right click, pre-compose. Let's name it slide 2. Place it below the layers. Let's check if I didn't miss anything. Yeah, everything is alright. Okay, let's continue to animate. I select the null object, press U. As always, I need to find the time when I want the animation to start, create a new keyframe, and the time when I want the animation to end. I move our null object. Let's open slide 2 and copy our solids. Paste them here. we need to place them in the center of our composition and make the same size as our footage. Now we need to move it to the right. We can delete these keyframes because we don't need them. Duplicate the null object again. And shift it on the timeline. Link the first solid to this null object. Duplicate again the null object and shift it. And parent the second solid to the new null object. Wait, we have two problems here. First, we need to move these solids to the center of the composition. And second, we need to place the blue solid above the pink one. Also, we need to shift the null objects on the timeline. Now it should be alright. Yes, now let's duplicate again the null object, shift it on the timeline, drop the next footage, make it the same size as our composition, link it to the null object after the animation. We need to find the time and cut the footage on the timeline. Now let's select the rest of the layers and cut them too. Okay, one more time we need to animate the scale. I find the time when I want the animation to start, then the time when I want the animation to end, copy the scale from slide 1, for example, paste it, and we're almost done. Now we only need to duplicate the text again. And edit it for the last time. I select anchor point tool, move it to the bottom right corner for both of the layers, and move our text to the bottom right corner of the composition. Don't forget that you can hold Ctrl to reverse the behavior of snapping. Okay, basically we are done, but we still need to make some corrections. Let's set the quality of preview to half, so it will be rendering faster. We need to shift the text animation a little bit. That's all, but let's organize our project. You will find out later why it's so important. I select these layers, cut them on the timeline, press Alt right square bracket. Here you can see this blue slider. Let's drag it to the end of our animation. Right click and trim comp to work area. And as you can see, it cropped our composition. The next thing we can do is to pre-compose our text, make separate compositions for every text holder. But let's cut them on the timeline first, because the composition will have the same duration as our layers. So I selected these 3 layers. Right click, pre-compose, text 3. The next one, pre-compose text 4. We can also go to slide 1 and pre-compose text 1 and pre-compose text 2. Now we can create folders for our footage, for our compositions. I create a new folder, name it footage, and drag my footage to this folder. Now we can create a separate folder for these new compositions. Create a new folder for slides. And also we can rename our main composition to main or render, for example. Now we need to pre-compose these layers as slide 3 and slide 4. I need to separate certain layers, find the time when I need to cut them. Slide 4 will contain only the last footage, text 4, and the last null object. And slide 3 will contain all these layers and text 3. Don't forget to place the composition below the last footage. And now we only need to cut these 2 layers and pre-compose them as slide 4. We can also delete these 2 keyframes because we don't need them. Now let's see if we didn't miss anything. Also, don't forget to drag slide 3 and slide 4 to slides folder. It's not necessarily, of course, but also we can go to our compositions and set the shy switch for all layers except for footage to hide them. We can do it for all compositions. Just turn the shy switch on and turn shy. And why it was so important to organize your project? Well, because you easily can make any changes. For example, right now I want to change my footage to another one. I select it, hold Alt, and drag and drop another footage. And I quickly changed my whole slideshow. It's way easier to find what you need to change. For example, I can quickly find any text. If I want to type something else, I go to text folder, open text 4 and type another text. So I recommend you to always organize your projects because it will be easier to make any changes. It's time to render our composition, and there are two ways. We can go to File, Export, Add to Render Queue. We can click here, choose Format, Format Options, then just hit Render. But there is another way. You can go to Composition, Add to Adobe Media Encoder Queue. And here you can choose more export settings. Set format, I prefer to set H264. You can select another preset, for example, high quality Full HD. Set output name and hit OK and just press this green button and it will render your composition. Okay, it's time to learn some effects. We will learn top most used effects, and the first one is Fill. You can just drag and drop it on your layer or just click twice on it. This effect allows you to quickly and easily set another color for your layer. You can also change opacity or invert. It will fill everything but your composition. It's very helpful. You don't have to select all the layers in the composition to set another color. Next effect is Drop Shadow. It creates shadow for your layer. You can edit distance, opacity, softness. Sometimes you need to use several drop shadows. And also you can click on shadow only. Only shadow will be visible. The next effect is Curves. Curves allows you to control red, green and blue channels. For example, I can select red channel and enhance it. So you can just make color corrections. You can select all the 3 channels, and if you enhance them, it will increase the brightness. The next effect is gradient ramp. It generates a gradient. You can use radial ramp. Basically, it's very helpful to create backgrounds sometimes. You can select another color. Okay, the next effect is fractal noise. It allows you to create background noise or some screen noise, light leaks, old movie effect, and etc. You can take the evolution to animate it. Transform it. By the way, you can add curves and colorize it. The next effect is CC Reptile. It allows you to expand your footage. It just duplicates some pixels. Sometimes it's also very helpful when you need to just cover some empty space. The next effect is brightness and contrast. It allows you to quickly and easily edit brightness and contrast. This can be helpful sometimes too. The next effect is turbulent displace. It allows you to distort some shape layers and make any kind of distortion. You can see what happens when we change values, amount or size. You can select another displacement. The next effect is CC Bender. It allows you to bend your objects. You can set another style. The next effect is box blur. It allows you to quickly and easily blur your footage. It's the simplest blur. There are also Gaussian blur and camera lens blur, but when you add them, it takes a lot of time to render. The next effect is CC Particle World. It allows you to create a lot of different particles. There are a lot of settings you can edit. And let me just create something. The next effect is noise. It allows you to add some noise to your footage. Sometimes it just looks better with noise. By the way, it's animated. The next effect is vignette. It makes the corners darker, so it makes the viewer to concentrate at the center of your video. The next effect is beam. It creates a line between two coordinates. And since you can control coordinates with expressions, sometimes it's very helpful. The next effect is grid. It generates a grid. And you can control the grid by changing the coordinates of the corner. The next effect is stroke. It adds a stroke to your layer and you can animate it and edit it. The next effect is glow. You can set any color you want. You can even add several glow effects. And the last one is simple choker. It just removes some pixels. Sometimes it's also helpful. Now we are going to make this camera movement. Okay, it's time to learn how to make camera movement. First of all, I need to import some photos. I need to create a few compositions for each footage and turn on 3D. Let's create a new composition, name it footage 1. another composition, footage 2, footage 3, and footage 4. Let's create a folder for them. And move all of it to the folder. Okay, let's open footage 1 and drop the first photo on the timeline. Ctrl-Alt-F to make it the same size as our composition. And we need to do the same with the other photos. Alright, now we need to drop all the footage on the timeline and make all of them 3D. Let's select Custom View 1, select the composition, and we can drag these arrows to move it in 3D space. We can also select a camera tool to view it from different perspectives. So let's just place all these compositions in different positions. I just drag these arrows to move it in 3D space. Okay, now let's go back to active camera. We can't see anything right now because we moved all the compositions. Let's create a new camera and go to transform. As you can see, position is set to -1866, and if we go to Custom View 1, we can see where is it. When we create any new layer, that position is set to 0, so camera always should be distant from the frame. So what we can do, we can create a new null object. We need to turn on 3D for it, and as you can see, its Z position is 0. And now we can link the camera to the null object. Let's rename it to cam. And as you can see, if we move the null object, we can use it as an aim for our camera. So I move the null object to align it with the center of the first composition. Now I select active camera and I want to change that position to move the camera away a little bit. Now I select another footage, press P, select the null object, also press P, click on the swatch, move the time marker, create a new keyframe, move the time marker again, copy the position of the center of the second composition and paste it to the null object. As you can see, it moved our camera straight to the second footage. And now I want to move the camera away again a little bit. And as you can see, we have this camera movement. I want to stretch the animation and select the keyframes and set keyframe velocity to 75. Now we have this camera movement. Okay, now I do the same with the second footage. I select it, press P, copy the coordinates of the footage and paste it to the null object. And move the camera away again. I also want to calibrate the X position. Okay, I select the keyframes to check the keyframe velocity. Yes, it's 75. We can also check the graphs. And now let's see what we have. Okay, now I do the same again with the last footage. I select it, press P, copy the position and paste it to the null object. Move the camera away again. Let's check the graphs. Yes, they are alright. And now let's see again what we have. Yeah, that's great. I also want to make camera movement before the first footage. Just select this keyframe and move the null object away. Set keyframe velocity to 75-25. It gives us this kind of graph. So this is what we have now. I think that's okay. We can also select custom view 1 to see how the camera is moving. Okay, and we can also select the null object to see how it's moving too. Okay, but we still can make it look a little bit nicer. We can also animate rotation. I set Z rotation to -13 for example, and then set the same Z rotation for the null object. Then I click on the swatch. Go back to the first keyframe and set it to 0. Then I do the same with the next composition. I move the time marker, select another composition, press R, set Z rotation to -20, and then I set the same Z rotation for the null object. Repeat it again with the next composition. And repeat it one more time with the last composition. And that's it. Now we have this cool camera movement. Okay, it's time to learn some basics of expressions. Expressions are scripts you can write for any value to determine where to get the value or how to calculate it. So basically, expressions allow you to animate without keyframes. To add expressions, you need to hold Alt and click on this watch. It already adds expression, transform, position. What it means? Basically, it says get the value that is already set. So as you can see, nothing happens. Let's create a new null object. Go to transform, select the expression and link it to the position of the null object. And what it says now, this comp means this composition main, layer null1, this null object, transform position. So basically it says get the value from the position of the null object. And as you can see, if we move the null object, this bar is moving too. It almost like if we link this layer to the null object, unless we can't move it. Okay, let's delete the null object and remove this expression. Let's learn the most used expressions. The first one is time. This expression simply sets time as a value. Right now, time is 0 seconds. If I move the time marker, you can see it starts to rotating. And if I move the time marker again, it sets the value to 8 because time is 8 seconds. We can multiply this by 100, for example. So it will be rotating faster. You can use this expression when you want to make endless animation. It's very helpful sometimes. The next expression is loop out. As you can see, I have two keyframes here, and this expression. The animation looks the same, but there is a big difference. I set 0 for the first keyframe and 180 for the second keyframe. This expression just loops our animation. So as you can see, if I set another value, the animation will be different. You can see right now, it just repeats these two keyframes over and over again. By the way, this expression loops the keyframes after them. If you move them on the timeline, you can see nothing happens before the keyframes. And the animation starts repeating after them. If I type loop in instead of loop out, the animation will be repeating before the keyframes, and it stops after them. Okay, this is it. But let's add ping pong to the expression. And let's see what happens now. So this new expression reverses the animation and then repeats it. As you can see, after this keyframe, it's coming back to the first one and then repeats the animation again, so it's pretty helpful. Okay, now let's type continue instead of ping pong. And if you look now at the value, you can see it's growing all the time. So what it does, it simply continues the animation. It's not coming back to the first keyframe, but sets the new value with the same speed you determined by these two keyframes. Here is the example of position animation. Simple loopout just repeats two keyframes. Loopout ping pong adds the reverse animation and repeats it over and over again. Loopout continue continues the animation. The next expression is wiggle. The first number is frequency and the second one is amplitude. Wiggle randomize the value. As you can see, it's wiggling right now. We can change the numbers, set it to 20 for example. It's more calm now. And we can also set frequency to 3. It's now even more calm. Okay, the last expression is index. Index is the number of the layer. Let's add it for position and type index. It shows the arrow because there are two values for position, X and Y position. So we have to separate them. We need to type left square bracket, index, comma, value, left square bracket 1, right square bracket, and right square bracket again. And now, as you can see, X position is 1, because the number of the layer is 1. So when it can be helpful? Let's multiply the index by 192. And now let's duplicate our layer. It almost covered our composition with these separate bars. Why it is so? The position of the first bar is set to 192 because we multiplied 1 by 192. The width of our composition is 1920, and these bars are 10% of the width. So we multiplied the number of the layer by the 10% of the width, and 9 bars covered 90% of the composition. The number of the next layer is 2, and accordingly the X position is 2 multiplied by 192. Okay, but we have one problem. One bar is missing. We have empty area. How we can fix it? We can simply type -1 after index and add parentheses. Let's delete the old bars and duplicate the new bar several times. As you can see, it solved our problem. In this part, we are making this text animation. When you select Type tool, you can just click on empty space and start typing, but you can also draw a rectangle while this tool is selected, and it will create a frame for your text. Alright, let's create a text layer and then animate it. I press Ctrl-Alt-Home and Ctrl-Home to set the anchor point in the center of the layer and my layer in the center of the composition. Let's make our timeline bigger and click here, then here, and on this button. Let's see what we have here. Position, scale, skew, rotation, opacity. Let's try to animate position. I open Range Selector 1, Advanced, you can set units to index, but I recommend to use percentage. Index shows how many of these characters excluding spaces, words or lines, so if you type another text you need another index. So let's set it to percentage. Now let's set position to -300 and let's see what happens if we change the percentage of end. So you see our characters are moving. That's exactly what we need to animate. By the way, if you set units to index, and set a certain value for end, you can see this value equals to the number of characters that moved. Okay, so let's animate start. I click on this watch, create a new keyframe, move the time marker and create another keyframe, set start to 100%. The characters are moving. And now I select the keyframes and set keyframe velocity to 50%. Let's see. Now I duplicate animator 1 and set position to 100. I press U and shift the animation. And let's see what happens now. So this animation is already more interesting. Okay, let's animate opacity now. I open Range Selector 1 again. Set opacity to 0%. Click on this watch, move the time marker, set start to 100%. Select the keyframes and set keyframe velocity to 50% too. Let's see. Now we have this interesting text reveal animation. But I want to make it more interesting. By the way, let's set our layer in the center again. Ctrl-Alt-Home and Ctrl-Home. Now let's animate rotation. I set the time marker in the beginning and click on this watch. Set the value to -90. Move the time marker and set the value to 90. Select the keyframes and set keyframe velocity to 50. Now we have this cool text reveal animation. I want to stretch this animation because it's too fast. I select the last keyframes and just move them. Okay, I like it more. You might have noticed that for some range selectors, the end is set to 0%, but for the last one, the end is set to 100%. So why it is so? Basically, it just reverses the animation. As you can see, I set 0% for the last range selector and it just reversed my animation. If I set 100% for these range selectors, it will reverse my position animation, as you can see. So this is basically how you animate text. You just select what you need to animate in the Animate menu and work with these parameters. Two popular things from this menu I want to show you. The first one is tracking type. It changes the distance between the units. And the second one is skew. So you can make any kind of text animation like that. Okay, let's save our project, Ctrl S. Okay, create a new null object. Rename it to 1. Turn on 3D. Motion blur. Turn on 3D and motion blur for the layers. And now let's type another text. Place it above the first text. Create a new null object for this text. Turn on 3D and motion blur. By the way, I can't snap the null object to the anchor point of the text if one of the layers is 3D and the other one is not. Let's link the text to the null object, and we can move them to the bottom a little bit. And now let's start animating. I go to transform, position, click on the swatch, move the time marker, create another keyframe, go back to the first keyframe, and change Y position. Now I hold Alt and click on the swatch again. And I want to copy and paste one expression. This is like a formula for our animation. Let's see what it does. It's called inertial bounce expression. You can find it in Google, just type After Effects inertial bounce expression and you will find it. They all have these three parameters: amplitude, frequency and decay. You set frequency to 1 and decay to 7. Set amplitude to 20 if your formula has V divided by 100. Your formula can have just V. In this case, you need to set amplitude to 0.2. In After Effects, you can just type period 2. Period 2 basically means 0 period 2. Now let's copy this expression and paste it to the position of the first null object. We also need to animate this null object. I create a new keyframe, move the time marker, change Y position a little bit, move the time marker and set another Y position. So let's see what we have now. I like this kind of animation. Okay, let's continue to animate. Create a new null object. Rename it to 3. Turn on 3D. And type another text. Set the color to white. And increase the font size. Make the layer 3D and link it to the null object. We need to change Z rotation to -90 and place it right here. We need to increase the font size more. That would be enough. Now find the right position. And now let's animate. I click on this watch, move the time marker, create another keyframe, go back to the first keyframe and set X rotation to -90. And it gives us this kind of animation. I select the keyframes, press F9, go to keyframe velocity and set it to 50%. Let's shift the animation. Now create a new camera, one node camera, create a new null object to control the camera, make it 3D, rename the null object to cam, link the camera to the null object, and now animate position. And Z rotation. Move the time marker, create new keyframes, set Z rotation to -90. And change X and Y position for camera controller. We need to align the letters. Just select the letter and change this value. Now let's see how it looks. Yeah, we need to select the keyframes and press F9 and set keyframe velocity to 50%. Okay, I like it, but we need to cut the last text on the timeline, because before the certain time it shouldn't be visible. We can even cut 2 more frames. Okay. The last thing we can do is to make the path of camera movement curved. Select the keyframes of the position and you can see these little sliders. If you move them, you can make the path curved, so the animation will look different. Let's see how it looks now. I like the result. Okay, we finished one composition, but let's learn some more tricks. I created a new composition and I want to copy the first text from the previous composition and paste it here because we just need this animation. Let's delete Animator 3. There are opacity and rotation. so we delete it and we have only position animation. Let's place it in the center of our composition, Ctrl Home. Now create a new solid, white color. We need to click here to be able to change X and Y scale separately. Set Y scale to 1%. Let's place it below the text. Now we need to decrease the X scale to fit the size of our text. Let's set it to 33%. Now move the anchor point to the left. Let's animate the scale. I click on the swatch, move the time marker, create a new keyframe, go back to the first keyframe and set X scale to 0%. And now we have this kind of animation. We can shift the animation, by the way. Now let's animate position. It will just make our animation more interesting. Okay, now we need to set keyframe velocity incoming velocity to 80% and outgoing velocity to 20%. It makes this kind of graph. Fast start and slow end. The same with the scale animation. And now the trick. Let's create a new solid. Let's name it alpha. Any color. We need to align this solid with the bar and link this solid to the bar. Also, let's rename. Place it above the text. Click on Toggle Switch Modes and set Track Mate for the text to Alpha Inverted Mate. And now we have this animation. We can make the animation to start earlier. Okay. Now let's create a new text layer. And type another text. We also need to place the new text in the center. Ctrl-Alt-Home and Ctrl-Home. Now let's set the tracking to negative 90. So our text is the same X size as the bar. And duplicate our alpha, place it above the new text, and set TrackMate for the text to AlphaMate. And now, if I set another Y position for the bar, our text will be transformed. So we have two solids and they both are linked to this bar. And the first solid is a mask for the first text and the other solid is an inverted mask for the second text. Let's set keyframe velocity to 50. And now let's cut the first text on the timeline. And make fade animation. So I create another keyframe. But I don't set any new values, because we need to make a pause. I move the time marker again and create another keyframe. Now I set the new value for Y position. Actually, I can just copy and paste the value from the second keyframe. Set keyframe velocity to 50%. Let's see the graphs. By the way, I need to create another keyframe for scale. And now let's split the bar layer. It will help us to avoid some difficulties. Select the bar and press Ctrl-Shift-D. Let's delete all the new keyframes and move the anchor point of the new layer to the right. And now we can animate the scale and position. Move the time marker, create new keyframes, set X scale to 0% and change the X position. Set keyframe velocity to 50%. And that's all. Let's see what we have. It's time to learn how to make transitions. There are unlimited ways how to make them, but we need to learn at least some techniques. So the first thing I want to tell you is that you can find transitions in Effects and Presets panel right here. As you can see, there is a list of them. Let's add a photo to the timeline, make it the same size as our composition, Ctrl-Alt-F. And let's try to apply CC Jaws. There is a value completion and you need to increase it to animated. You can also rotate it. Edit the other settings. Okay, let's try to apply another transition. For example, linear wipe. This is the simplest transition, but it's mainly used for other purposes, not to make a transition. Okay, let's apply another one. For example, CC grid wipe. This is a pretty popular one. Usually it's used with solids and shape layers. You can try to change some settings. For some transitions like CC Twister, you have to set backside right here. For CC Glass Wipe, you need to set layer to reveal and gradient layer. It can be the same layer, by the way. You can use other effects as transitions, for example, CC Page Turn. We need a back page. I'm gonna use this solid, but it's better to use some paper texture. And now you can just animate this fold position. Of course, you can create transitions without any effects. Let's create a new full screen shape layer. Go to rectangle, right click here, convert to Bezier path. And now let's animate this path. I create a new keyframe, go to the first keyframe and move the corners to the center. And we have this animation now. Let's set keyframe velocity to 75-25. We have this animation now. Now let's set track mate to alpha mate and shift the footage and the shape layer on the timeline. We can duplicate the shape layer, place it below the second footage, shift it on the timeline and set another color, for example, white. So we have this transition now. Alright, let's delete the shape layers. And try to create another transition. By the way, I didn't make the second footage the same size as our composition, so let's select it and press Ctrl Alt F. Okay, select pen tool, draw this line. Add a stroke. Set stroke width to 5. Add trim path. And animate the end. Click on this watch, move the time marker, create another keyframe, go back to the first keyframe, set end to 0%. Select the keyframes and press F9. So now we have this animated line. Select the second footage and draw a mask over this line. I'm gonna divide this footage in two parts and then create a transition. Now we need to animate the position of the line, so we go to Transform, Position, click on this watch, move the time marker, change the position, just move it to the right. And now we need to animate the mask. I just create two keyframes, go to the second one and move the mask to the right. Select the keyframes and press F9. And now we need to duplicate the footage and change the mask animation. Delete the old keyframes, select the two corners of the mask and move it to the left. Now we need to animate the new mask. Duplicate the line and just change the position for the last keyframe. Select the keyframes and press F9. So now we have this transition. This is how you can create transitions using masks without any effects. But basically, there are unlimited ways how you can create transitions. This time we will create this simple shape animation. It's time to learn some basics of shape animation. Let's create a new shape layer. Click here, then here, and add ellipse. Click here and set the size to 250. Now we need to add stroke. Set stroke width to 75, for example. And set another color. Okay. Now let's add trim path. Trim path controls what percent of the stroke is visible. So if I change these values, a certain percent of the stroke will not be visible. By the way, we need to set land cap to round cap in stroke settings. And now let's animate the start. So I set both of these values to 0%, move the time marker, and set the start to 100%. It creates this kind of animation. Now select both keyframes, press F9 and set keyframe velocity to 50% as always. After the full stroke becomes visible, let's animate the size. move the time marker and set the size bigger than our composition. Select the keyframes and set keyframe velocity to 80 and 20. It gives us this kind of graph. Now animate the stroke width. I want to increase it until it fills the whole screen. So this is basically how you make shape animations. Alright, I want to animate rotation. I just create 2 keyframes and set 180 degrees for the second keyframe. And it gives us this kind of animation. Let's set the quality of preview to half and rename our shape layer to main circle, because we will have a lot of shape layers and we can get confused. We need to create a background. Let's create a new solid, set white color, place it below the shape and rename it to BG, and lock this layer. It just looks better with white background. Alright, let's create a new shape layer. It will be the burst. Add path. Click on title action save. And hold shift to draw a straight line. Add stroke. Set another color. Set stroke width to 5. Maybe even 4. And add trim path again. We need to set both values to 0% again and animate them both. Move the time marker and set them both to 100%. And now let's shift the start animation. And as you can see, the stroke is animated. But I want the animation to start not from the center, so I set the values for the first keyframes to 50%. Or maybe 40%. Let's set keyframe velocity to 50. And now let's add repeater. Repeater creates copies of your shape layer Let's set it to maybe 7. Go to transform repeater, set position to 0, and we need to set rotation 360 divided by the number of copies. We can actually type an expression for it. Hold Alt, click on this watch, and type 360 divided by number of copies. And as you can see, we have this burst now. Let's set copies to 9. And this expression calculates the new value for rotation. Now let's rename this shape to burst 1. And save our project, Ctrl S. Now let's create a cross. Select Pen tool, right click, New Shape Layer. Let's rename it to a cross. And add path. Draw a straight line again, hold Shift. It's too long, let's make it shorter. Don't forget to hold Shift to keep the line straight. Add stroke. Set another color. Set stroke width to 3 or maybe 4 and add trim path again. We need to set both values to 0% again. Animate the start. Set 100%, then animate end. Set 100% too after a certain time. So it gives us this kind of animation. As usual, select the keyframes, press F9, go to keyframe velocity and set it to 75%. Also, we can shift the end animation, so it will start disappearing earlier. And maybe stretch the animation like this. By the way, we need to set line cap to round cap. And now add repeater. We need to set the number of copies to 2, set position to 0, and rotation to 90. Now we need to set the position to make a cross. Maybe set it to -33. We need to rotate it. Just go to transform and set rotation to -45. And we have a cross now. By the way, if you will try to move it, you can spoil it. So set another position by changing these values. So I just set another value. Now let's duplicate our cross. Set another position. And let's shift the layer on the timeline. And duplicate now again. Let me try to find the best position for them. That looks alright. Okay, now let's create another shape layer and rename it to circle. Add a new ellipse. Let's animate size. Create a new keyframe. Go to the first keyframe, set size to 0 and add stroke. Set another color. And let's animate stroke width. Set it to 5 and to 0 for the last keyframe. Now we can move it. And we have this little bubble. Select the keyframes, set keyframe velocity to 50. Okay, duplicate one more time and place it somewhere. Shift the animation to the timeline. Duplicate again. And shift the animation again. That looks pretty well. Alright, now duplicate the cross again. Place it above all the layers and let's set another color for the layer. For example, orange. So we will know these crosses are different. So go to trim path and remove the animation. Set start to 100%. Let's set another color. and increase the stroke width. Now go to transform and animate position. We need to find the right time for the animation. So this will be the end of the animation and this will be the start of the animation. I try to set the coordinates of the sender for the first keyframe. Okay, we have this movement and let's add also a rotation animation. Okay. By the way, I want to set the anchor point in the center of the cross, so it will change our animation a little bit. As you can see, it changes the animation. Okay, I select the keyframes and set keyframe velocity to 80 and 20. It gives us this kind of graph. Fast start and slow end. And the same for rotation animation. Okay. Now again we need to duplicate the new cross. And this time we need to set another position. And change rotation. By the way, we can select both keyframes and it will change rotation for both keyframes. Duplicate the cross one more time, change position again. And rotation for both keyframes. Okay. Now let's do the same with circles. Duplicate the cross layer and rename it to circle 1. We need to delete the path. We can also delete trim path and add ellipse. Place it above the stroke, which is important, and delete repeater. Press Ctrl-Alt-Home to set the anchor point in the center of the circle. And now find another position. decrease the size, and also decrease the stroke width. Let's see what we have now. Duplicate the circle again. Change position. By the way, don't spoil the animation like this. You need to set the time marker at the keyframe to set a new value instead of creating a new keyframe. Let's see how it looks. We need to shift the animation just a little bit. That looks better. Okay, let's duplicate the circle again and rename it to square. We're going to do the same with squares right now. Go to Contents, remove the ellipse, add a rectangle, change the size, set another position, duplicate one more time, shift the animation and set another position, and duplicate one more time and set another position. Don't forget to shift the animations. Now we need to select the keyframes and to change rotation a little bit. Do the same with the other squares, of course. To be honest, I think 2 squares would be enough. Let's delete one. And make some more corrections. And let's see now. That looks okay. Let's save our project. The next thing I want to do is to duplicate our burst. Place it above all the layers, shift on the timeline. We need to select another color. We need to find the right time to start. Maybe make some more corrections for the elements. I think the burst is too long. Let's just shift these keyframes to make it shorter. Now I want to set another number of copies, for example 11. Let's see what we have now. Honestly, I want to shift the burst animation a little bit more. Okay, let's zoom out the timeline and cut all the layers on the timeline. Select all of them and press Alt right square bracket. And now right click and pre-compose them. Okay. And let's search the effect called Radial Wipe. Actually, it's a transition. So, if we increase the transition completion, it will erase our composition, like this. Let's set wipe to both. You can see what it does. And set start angle to 90. Now let's animate transition completion. Click on this watch, press U, move the time marker. Need to find the right time. And set transition completion to 50%. Now duplicate our radial wipe. Press U twice and set start angle to -90. And this gives us this kind of transition. Let's shift the first keyframes and select the keyframes and set keyframe velocity to 50% as always. That's too fast probably, so let's stretch the animation. Okay, now let's create a new solid with this color. Cut it on the timeline and copy our radial wipe and radial wipe 2. And paste it to this solid. Now we need to shift the animation, and we have now this transition. Let's stretch the transition. This solid has to be visible when the animation starts, so we need to make it visible earlier. Alright, now let's save our project. Ctrl S. Let's import our project with the text animation. Just drag and drop it on the project panel. It transforms into a folder. Open it. And now open the last composition in this project. Here it is. Right click, trim comp to work area. And we need to just drop this composition on the timeline. By the way, the color of our background is white and our composition is white, so we don't see it. We need to apply the effect wheel to our composition, and let's change color to black. Don't forget to turn on motion blur. So now we have this animation. Now drag this blue slider and trim comp to work area. Okay, let's get back to pre-comp 1 and create a new adjustment layer. Place it above all the layers. By the way, we need to make transparent background and apply the effect drop shadow. I need to change maybe distance a little bit and direction. And increase softness and opacity. Okay, as you can see, it applies not to all elements because the first circle transforms into a background. We need to make a separate composition again. I just select all the layers except for this circle and the adjustment layer, and I need to find the time when the elements are on this background. Pre-compose them and copy our adjustment layer. Place it below the composition. And now let's see. We have shadows. Looks much better. But it still needs some fixes, I think. First of all, we need to shift the text animation to make the animation start earlier. And I want to make some corrections in pre-comp 2. First of all, I want to duplicate the burst. Shift it on the timeline. And edit it a little bit. Set another color. It looks too long, I think. So I press U and move these keyframes. Let's set another color for the layer on the timeline. And now go to path and change the path. It will change completely our animation. Let's see now. I like this. Now let's duplicate the circles. Set another color for the layer and shift it on the timeline. We also need to find another place for this. And duplicate it one more time and move to another place. And duplicate one more time and move to another place again. So we have these bubbles too. I accidentally moved the adjustment layer. Just Ctrl Z. I still try to find a better place for these bubbles. Let's set blue color for them. And save our project. So this is what we have now. This is basically how you create motion graphic animation. You just create shape layers and then add elements, parameters, and animate them. Okay, it's time to add some effects to make it look a little bit better. By the way, I set yellow color for the burst and the bubbles. So the first thing I would like to do is to create a vignette. I need to select these layers and pre-compose them. Now I search for the effect and apply it to the new composition. So the corners became a little bit darker. Let's set the amount to 120. The next thing we can add is noise. Set the amount to 5%. Maybe even 3. Okay, now I want to apply turbulent displays to the lines. It just makes the lines curved. It looks much better. We don't even have to change settings. By the way, it looks pretty good with the black background. Let's see how it looks now. Okay, and now I want to apply turbulent displace for the other elements, but I need to set another settings, because if we don't change the settings, it just doesn't look good. You can see right now how it looks. Let's set amount to 10 and size to 20. That looks alright. Let's lower the quality. Now I just create another adjustment layer. I need to place it below the lines. And apply turbulent displace with the same amount and size values. Well, let's set the size to 15. And I also need to place the first burst above the new adjustment layer. Let's see what we have now. Okay, so the last thing we can add is another noise. Let's create a new solid and name it noise. And apply the effect called fractal noise. Increase the contrast. Decrease the brightness. And decrease the scale. Now I search for the effect called invert. It inverts colors. So now we have a white background with black noise. We can edit brightness and contrast because it's barely visible. Now I need to select the mode multiply. And now we have this black noise. Okay, and now let's animate them. We can animate evolution, but it will be smooth. I want to make it random, so I need to animate random seed. I hold Alt, click on this watch and type time multiplied by 15. That's all. Right now I have this video and this animated shape layer. And I want this shape layer to be aimed at that building. Of course, I can do it manually, just animate position, but there is another way to do that. I open Tracker panel and click Track Motion. Now I just move these squares. The smaller square determines what pixels would be tracked, and the bigger one determines the area that would be analyzed. So you need to find the track. They should stand out from the frame. I think this object would be fitting. Okay, so I select only position, I don't need to track rotation or scale, and press this button, Analyze Forward. And it starts analyzing. If something went wrong, you can fix it manually. It works well. Okay, so I can just press Apply, both directions, and OK. And as you can see right now, this shape layer is now aimed to that building. So this is how it works. The next thing is Content-Aware Fill. It allows you to remove some objects from your frame, and let's try to remove this thing. First of all, we need to draw a mask. Set the mask to None. And now we need to select this mask and drag this mask. Almost like we were doing before. And as you can see, it spoils at the end, so we can just fix it manually. Just press U, delete the last keyframes. We need to check if everything is correct. This frame should be fixed. Okay, Now I set the mask to subtract and go to Content Aware Fill. Alpha extension set to 3, Object, and Generate Fill Layer. It will take some time, so let's just wait. Okay, and as you can see, it doesn't look perfect. If you are not satisfied with the result, you can just give it another try. The most important thing is your mask, so you can try to animate it manually, or just draw another mask, a bigger one or a smaller one. Basically, this is how you can remove objects from your frame. Okay, you might have seen green screen videos or when something recorded with the green background. Green screen is just very easy to remove. Let's do it right now. I have this clip. First thing I need to do is to draw a mask. Cut what I don't need. You need a good green and plain background for better results. This is off-green, so it won't be easy to get good results. Okay, so now we search for key light. And apply it to the footage. Set the color and increase screen gain, decrease screen balance, and as you can see, it removes the green background. If you had a better background, it will remove your background better. And now you can just select another background or do some other things. So basically this is how you remove these green backgrounds. Okay, it's time to work with some 3D compositions. Let's import one photo. It's just one of my photos. Make it the same size as our composition, Ctrl-Alt-F. And let's turn on 3D. We need to set custom view 1. And if we move the camera forward, the camera movement doesn't look realistic, because when you really move camera in 3D space, objects that are closer to the camera scale differently than objects that are farther from the camera. So let's divide the footage to objects that are closer to the camera and objects that are further from the camera. To do that, you need to just select pen tool and draw a mask. For example, right now I'm drawing a mask for this rock. So you can just see me drawing the mask. By the way, it doesn't have to be very accurate. So now we separated one object. Now let's duplicate our layer. Set the mask to subtract here. And now we need to draw another mask. Okay, we have the second mask, and we don't need the third one because we can just duplicate this layer and set subtract for both masks, and the third part will be separated. By the way, we need to place the second mask above the first one because the first one is set to subtract. Now we duplicate this layer and set both masks to subtract. Now let's rename our layers to 1, 2, and 3. And let's check how we separated the layers. Press Ctrl S to save our project. Okay, now let's select Custom View 1. Move the camera away from the picture. And now select the third footage and set Z position to -2000. Now select the second footage, press P to quickly select position and set position to 0. Select the first footage and set Z position to 2000. Now let's scale the footage up until it looks like a complete picture. These black areas shouldn't be visible. It's quite hard to find the right percentage of the scale. We need to do some fixes. It might take some time to make everything right. Just set other position and scale. It won't be perfect anyway. So we still see some black areas are there, but let's see how the camera movement changed. As you can see, it looks more realistic, but we still need to make some corrections. Let's try to increase the scale of this first object. And now increase the scale of the second object. And increase the scale of the third footage. So basically we just need to find the right position and scale for all the objects. Let's save our project, Ctrl S. There are still black areas. But let's create a new camera. And controller for the camera. Make it 3D and link the camera to the null object. And rename the null object to cam. Let's try to change position and see how it's gonna look like. It should be easier now to find the right scale and position. The most important thing is that pictures should look organic, because we can just scale it too much or move it too far. I create another keyframe and move the camera. Of course, you can make it even better with some other compositions, but right now I just show an example. I'm still trying to find the right values. Okay, only one problem left, this rock. Okay, let's try to increase the scale a lot and then just cover all of it. It takes some time, as I said. Okay, well, no need to increase the scale like that. too big. We just need to cover the black areas. Almost done. Oh, that's alright. That's what I wanted. Ah, wait, there is still some small black area. So as you can see, right now, it looks way more realistic. So let's select the keyframes of camera movement and press F9. Also, we need to cover this black area in the left bottom corner. To do that, we can just change camera position a little bit. And now let's see. The same you can do with mountains and any compositions, basically any photos. Now let's work with 3D text, and this is how you can create 3D text, 3D objects. Let's type some text and place it in the center of the composition. Ctrl-Alt-Home and Ctrl-Home. I'll turn on 3D. As you can see, it looks flat. It's not 3D. So let's go back to Active Camera. And now increase the scale of this text. Now go to Transform, hold Alt and click on the swatch. And now type this expression. Left square bracket value, left square bracket 0, right square bracket, comma, value, left square bracket 1, right square bracket, comma, value, left square bracket 2, right square bracket, plus index, asterisk 2, and right square bracket. What it means? Value 0 means X position, value 1 it means Y position, value 2 means Z position, plus index. Index is the number of the layer. This number of the layer, this one. Asterisk 2 means multiplied by 2. And now let's just duplicate our layer and see what happens. As you can see right now, Z position is 4, and if we duplicate it again, Z position is 6, because it multiplies the number of the layer by 2. And now let's just duplicate the layer multiple times. Let's select Camera Tool, Custom View 1, and let's see. Our text is now 3D, as you can see. It looks 3D. So this is how you actually create 3D objects, 3D text. You can also create 3D cubes and etc. But there is one thing I need to tell you. Working with this number of layers is very hard because you always need to select them all if you want to change color, for example. It would be even more harder if you want to make any animations. You need to create a null object and link all of the layers to the null object. So what I recommend you to do is to work with compositions. Let's delete all the layers, copy this expression, delete it, and pre-compose our text. And now we can edit the text in the composition. Set another color, for example. Increase the size. And use this expression for position of the composition. By the way, we need to turn on 3D, because if we don't, it shows an error because there is no value 2. Let's duplicate now the compositions. So let's see. Our text is still 3D. But we can edit it easily. We can just open this composition, edit our text, type something else, and it will change all the layers. Okay, so let's learn some popular tricks. First of all, I need to add a footage to the timeline. Make it the same size as the composition, Ctrl-Alt-F. And I want to make it only 5 seconds long. I set the time marker at 5 seconds. And press Alt right square bracket. Now right-click, pre-compose, and we need to select Move All Attributes into the new composition, so the checkbox Adjust Composition Duration to the time span of the selected layers will be available. And now the composition has the same time duration as the layer. I can show if we pre-compose it and select Leave All Attributes in Comp 1, the composition will not have the same time duration. Okay, let's rename this composition to Footage 1. And move it to the folder footage I created before. Now we need to search for the effect called Mosaic. Notice that there is an animation preset and the effect, and you need to apply the effect, not the preset. Okay, so I set vertical blocks to 6 because I need squares, not rectangles. You can try to set another number of horizontal or vertical blocks if you want another animation. Okay, so I pre-compose it one more time, and this time I need to select Move All Attributes into the new composition again. Let's name it Map 1. Let's add the composition Footage 1 to the timeline. Now I search for the effect called Displacement Map and apply it to the footage. I set Displacement Map layer to Map 1, set Max Vertical Displacement to 0, and now I want to animate Max Horizontal Displacement. I click on the watch, press U. By the way, I can just press Shift page down 3 times to set the time marker at 1 second. I set the value to 0 and now I go back to the first keyframe. Set the value to -400. Select the keyframes, set keyframe velocity to 80-20. And we have these black areas. We need to search for motion tile and add this to the footage. I place it above the displacement map. Click on the checkbox Mirror Edges and increase the output width. Let's set it to 150. And it gives us this distortion. It's a very popular thing. We can replace the footage to see how it looks with a different one. Alright, you can open the map composition and set another number of horizontal or vertical blocks. For example, set horizontal blocks to 1. It will look different. You can set vertical blocks to 1. In this case, it would be better to animate max vertical displacement. And you also need to increase output height then. Also, we need to set keyframe velocity to 80 and 20. And let's see how it changed the animation. Of course, it's not the only way you can use displacement map. Let's create a text layer and type some text. Place it at the center of the composition. And create a new solid, name it map. Okay, now let's search for the effect called fractal noise and apply it to the solid. We need to set noise type to block, increase the contrast, and decrease the brightness. We need to set complexity to 2. Go to transform, disable uniform scaling and increase scale width. We can also decrease scale height, but it's optionally. Okay, now we need to animate a random seed. I hold Alt, click on the swatch and type time multiplied by 15. That would be enough. So it gives us this glitchy screen. And now we need to pre-compose it. Right click, pre-compose, move all attributes into the new composition. Let's name it map text. Make it invisible and apply displacement map to the text layer. set displacement map layer to map text, and increase max horizontal and vertical displacement. As you can see, now our text is glitching. We can try to animate max horizontal displacement or vertical displacement. We can write an expression, wiggle 2, 90. But it's optional too. We can just animate it. For example, set it by default to 0 and at a certain time increase to like 70 or 60. So I created 6 keyframes. I set 0 for the first 2 and the last 2. Now let's play it. So it gives us this short glitch. We can copy and paste the keyframes after a certain time to create a second glitch. And what is very important here is that if we didn't pre-compose the map, it just didn't work. Let's copy the map, paste it. And use it as displacement map layer. You can see nothing happens. Because you need to either set effects and masks here, it will be glitching. Either pre-compose it, like we did before. Alright, the next trick I'm about to show you is extremely popular. Let's create a new solid and search for the effect called 4-color gradient. We need to select 4 colors. Basically, we need to select soft colors. Let's try this one. Pink color would be fitting. And the last one. Light green. Okay, I like these colors. So now we need to animate the points. I set the time marker at the beginning, hold Alt and click on this watch. I just need to wiggle it. Wiggle 2, 50. Now this point is moving. let's set the amplitude to 70. Okay. Now I need to set the same expression for the other points. I just copy it and paste it. So now they are moving. By the way, let's apply slider control. Rename it to frequency. And another slider control, rename it to amplitude. And now we can select the number and link it to the slider control. Also, we select the amplitude and link it to the second slider control. And now we can quickly set another value. For example, 3 and 100. Let's set the same expression for the other points. So now we can quickly edit them. It's just a very helpful trick if you want to easily edit it. Okay, so now let's animate the colors. I click on the swatch, set the time marker at 1 second, and just select another color. And now I do the same with the other colors. I need to swap the keyframes here. So now the colors are changing. And I do the same with the third color and the fourth color. By the way, I can also just copy and paste the keyframe. It looks pretty well. Now we can also add an expression. Loopout ping pong. And of course we need to set the same expression for the other color animations. So now they will be changing over and over again. But I want to add more keyframes. It will be better. I can just copy the keyframes and paste it. This one I want to paste here. This one I can paste here. And the last one, okay, so now we have this cool animation. Now we just need to select a blending mode. Actually, you can try different modes. I prefer to use a soft light. You can try to decrease opacity. The overlay mode also looks pretty well. We can decrease opacity to 50%, for example. And I like this. And I also like soft light with opacity like 70%. Another thing you can create is a lens flare. Let's create a black solid and apply the effect called lens flare. We can move the center of it. Increase flare brightness. I prefer to write a wiggle expression for it. Wiggle to, 20. Now you can apply any effect to colorize it. For example, hue saturation. Click Colorize it. And if we set another value for colorize hue, the colors would be changing. And also let's apply box blur. Set it to 5. Okay, now let's set mode to soft light too. And now we have this lens flare. We can try another mode, of course. So this is how you can improve your videos a lot. And that's all. If you have really watched this till the very end and you haven't skipped anything, thank you very much, really. If I helped at least one person, my efforts were worth it. I don't know what else to say, just thank you very much. Muchas gracias. Vielen Dank. Merci beaucoup. Thank you, thank you, thank you.